Hey everyone, my name is Donna, and this is Phoenix Fire. Today's live production is brought to you in part by Prairie Sky Recovery Center in Leipzig, Saskatchewan. Prairie Sky Recovery Center offers private intensive addictions treatment and supports medically assisted treatment strategies. Today's production is also brought to you in part by Stronger Together Canada, peer-led support groups through Moms Stop the Harm. To learn more about our sponsors, please visit www.hardknockstalks.com. Today's guest, Anders Beatty, a person who was once in addiction but found a happier way to live through Ibogaine and who is now an Ibogaine pre-treatment counselor and certified integrative psychotherapist. And we're going to meet him right after this. I spent a year and a half on the streets. Addiction took me there. Pain took me there. My name is Donna, person in recovery, domestic violence survivor, mother of two. I spent years running from myself, but no more. I've come to find peace, and I am not here to light a candle. I am here to set fire to the darkness and give voice to the voiceless. I hope you'll join me and my guests as we face the stigma around addiction and tear down the walls of oppression. This is not a safe space. This is a brave space. This is Phoenix Fire. Okay, let's bring in Anders.
Hi.
Good day, sir. How are you?
Good day. Yeah, very well. Very well. Beautiful bucolic evening in England here.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing quite an English summer when we have the sunshine. So I'm coming to you from my parents' garden, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
The only place I will not be terrorized by my 2-year-old and 7-year-old.
I can relate. Mine are 8.5 and 3.5, so I get it 100%. So I'd just like to say thanks so much for joining us today. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we get started?
Yeah, just let me not
Yeah,
blind
it's like
you
an
with.
event horizon.
There we go. Yeah, just thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for everybody who's come on board to listen to what I say, and I hopefully for some of you it might make sense.
Wonderfully put. So first off, and as mentioned a few moments ago, you are a person in recovery,
Yeah,
but you prefer to use the language once in addiction.
once an addiction.
And like I know that the language is trying to shift to person in recovery, but you prefer even once in addiction, largely I think because
Hmm.
of that labeling thing. So,
Hmm.
but can you please tell us a little bit about your story, and why you prefer that particular language?
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think I'll start with the story. Is essentially I was in addiction for 25 years, in one form or another. When we talk addiction, we're talking about sort of drugs or alcohol, but I was addicted beforehand. I was addicted to misery. I was addicted to not being good enough. I was addicted to procrastination. You know, my addictions were there from a very, 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 very young age. And throughout my journey, I tried very, very, very hard to get out of drug addiction. Countless rehabs and detoxes, continually kind of thinking to myself, well, if I've got a job here, or if I went out with that girl, or if I'd moved to America, which I did lots of geographicals. And the addict self always was a couple of weeks behind me on the aeroplane. And I got to a stage where at the end of my using, I was pretty much isolated in a tiny, tiny room with the ceiling coming down on me and the walls coming in on me. And I was getting more and more and more miserable. And somehow this ancient plant medicine called Ibogaine came across my path. And in pure desperation, I went and took it. And it was a real transpersonal experience for me. It really changed the way I defined myself, how I looked at myself, how I looked at addiction, how I looked at my trauma, how I looked at my family's trauma, how I looked at my responses to life. I'm just trying to get this light out of the way. There we go. By moving
Perfect.
the camera, that works. Yeah, and I took Ibogaine, and I've got to say that, you know, I haven't been in addiction since. You know, and I firmly believe that's a very important distinction for me to make, because, you know, in a really weird way, what I would like to say is my addiction was the vehicle that brought me to a place where I could do this profound work on myself. The addiction was never, ever the problem. Never the problem. What we need to concentrate is why the addict. And so, you know, for a lot of my life, I kind of, as I said, if I only went out with that girl, if I only had that job, if I only moved to this country, if only I had a drink, if only I had a line, if only I had a pipe, I'd feel better. And so what I was continually doing was looking externally to fill the void in my chest. Young Pueblo puts it beautifully. I'll have to paraphrase him because I'm not that clever. But he says, I was never addicted to one thing. The only thing I've ever been addicted to is filling the void I feel in my chest with anything other than self-love. And so for me, the Ibogaine journey was the first part of the journey of learning to love myself. And the intentionality and the integrity and the respect and reverence that I put into the process of working with Ibogaine was perhaps the first time I'd put intentionality, integrity, respect, and reverence into my own narratives, my own understanding of self.
Okay.
I need to change that, don't I? There we go.
Never dull when it's live. So I'm kind of curious, because of the fact that you are a pre-treatment counselor. Did you have the opportunity to have pre-treatment before your Ibogaine experience, or?
Yeah, I did. I had an incredible Ibogaine provider, a guy called Paul Featherston, who's not working out of Britain anymore. I think he is working elsewhere in the world. And with 24 hours to go before my Ibogaine treatment, he phoned me up and said, you know what? You're not ready.
Oh.
You're not a viable candidate. I'm not going to do this for you. And so I was bloody angry at the time. I was livid. But actually, he did me the greatest favor ever. And, you know, what went through my head is, you know, why am I not allowed to go and do Ibogaine? You know, I've got the money. I want to go there and I want to pay for it. And the reality is if you're doing these ancient entheogens and psychedelics, if you don't put, it's not about just turning up and expecting them to work for you. They are not magic bullets. They are profound catalysts for change. But you have to put the intentionality and the integrity and the respect and reverence into that process to make it work. And you know, that starts in pre-treatment. That starts in turning up to sessions. That starts by looking at, you know, where did the trauma perhaps originate from? That starts by, what am I going to be wearing for the ceremony? That starts with, what are my plans post working with Ibogaine? Because, you know, many people believe that Ibogaine is you know, it's the tree of knowledge from the parable of Adam and Eve. This is a big, gnarly, Old Testament rite of passage. You know, the Beatty firmly believe that it's a way of attaching and talking to your ancestors to get advice. And, you know, I would have said this is all mumbo jumbo bullshit before I did Ibogaine. And, you know, sure enough, the first people I meet on my first Ibogaine journey were my grandparents. experience,
Mhm.
which is something I can talk about a little bit later.
Sure.
So, there seems to be a problem with the Western mentalities. If I've got the money, I can pay for something and it better work for me. And what the Ibogaine is actually saying is, we don't work that way. Uh, we're not hair conditioner that you just buy and put in your hair and suddenly you've got shiny hair. You've got to really, really bring yourself into the experience. It's not about turning up to the experience. It's about bringing yourself into the experience. And that's what adds the value.
Mhm. So in terms of the pre-treatment, i- now being like a psychotherapist, that if I understand correctly, is more talk therapy. Am I
Yeah, I
correct in
mean,
that, or
it is talk therapy, but
okay,
in many ways, I would say that more and more and more of a coach these days.
okay,
Um, and I think there's an important distinction to
hmm,
make because
hmm,
as a therapist, you're supposed to be non-directive, and I'm afraid to say I don't have time to be non-directive. When I first started doing this, I was very non-directive in my approach, and I lost a couple of clients before they did Ibogaine, and I realized that I haven't got time to fuck around.
hmm,
Um, we need to prepare our clients, so we've developed a protocol which people can attach to,
okay,
and that can really make a profound difference to the efficacy of the Ibogaine. My general kind of feeling is, and there's no true empirical data out there. There's a little bit about the data that you get from taking Ibogaine. It's probably got a 25 to 35% success rate, which blows every other modality out of the water. But if you
hmm,
attach therapy or counseling or coaching to it and have a plan and are willing to change your life in every way possible, to reconnect to your transpersonal self, then our rates are going up to 75-80%. I mean, I work very, very closely with a guy called Gareth Moxie.
hmm,
He was on one of your shows last week or two
yep,
weeks ago.
just last week
um
with Dan. Hmm.
yeah, and when we work together, we have a beautiful, beautiful life because we see so many of our clients just beginning that process of actualizing, becoming something, becoming themselves, dropping all the bullshit narratives that define them as an addict when they were younger.
Hmm.
And that's really the important thing to understand, because I strongly, strongly believe, and this is one line I've written, and it's a very, very simple line, but it's perhaps the one I'm most proud of, is that, addiction is essentially self-medicating against feeling inauthentic,
Hmm.
feeling 80% of you the whole time, not quite knowing who you are.
Hmm.
Um, and so when we're working with people and they start to redefine who they are and they start to work out who they are and they start to tear down the prison that put them into addiction in the first place, um, it's one of the most gratifying, beautiful, wonderful privileges to be part of.
Hmm. And during our during our discussion, you had mentioned that you don't believe that addiction is a disease, which I think in some way you kind of alluded to there. Which
Yeah, I mean,
conversely, I
I
had a
think,
neuroscientist on a couple of weeks ago who it would actually be very interesting to have the two of you in a room to have an open discussion about that topic. But can you expand a little bit more on your beliefs in
yeah,
that front?
I think it is a dis-ease, and I think that's a very important distinction to make. Um, and I do think it is an illness of the spirit. It's an illness of who you are or how you define yourself. Um, and I think that's the important thing to the important distinction to make. I certainly don't feel diseased now.
Mm-hmm.
I found it very, very, very difficult in the rooms. And don't get me wrong, I did the rooms for 18, 19 years. I didn't do them very well. I've probably got enough white key rings to tile a bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
But, when I felt very, 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 very powerless through that process. I've got
Mhm.
to say. And, maybe the first step is about powerlessness. Um, I don't want to denigrate it or demean it fully. I think it's a fantastic tool for many people, and it is a tool. It's not a religion. I think that's the important thing to say here.
Mhm.
Um, and I still pop into the rooms occasionally. I still like to pop in, and I like to see what's going on, and I like to hear the stories.
Mhm.
Um, but it's not my religion anymore. I don't see it as, let's put it this way, that, and I hope I'm not being too kind of political here, but what I used to hear when I was going into rooms is that, I'm Anderson, I'm an addict, and I'm going to have to be an addict for the rest of my life. I just have to be an addict for the rest of my life. And then I'm told I'm diseased, that, there's something profoundly wrong with me. And then I'm told that I'm not to be trusted by, I'm a burden on my friends, family, and society in general. And because of that, I'm not to be trusted
Mhm.
with my own reasoning, to such an extent that I need a sponsor to help me modulate my thinking.
Mhm.
Um, and my thinking must be based on the 12 steps and 12 traditions. And if I don't attach to these 12 steps and 12 traditions, I will end up in jail, institution, or dead. And by the way, you better be fucking grateful for what we're giving you. But to be honest, these were pretty much the same sort of
Anders,
narratives that brought.
I'm sorry.
Sorry
I'm
about
gonna
the
have
swearing.
to. No, 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 no. Swearing is perfectly fine. The problem is you're half off the screen. Can you
Okay,
raise
sorry,
it?
I'm trying to
There, I
avoid
know you're
that
trying to
light.
block that light out, but yeah, there we go.
Okay,
There we go.
can we
Now we
do that?
gotcha.
Yeah, so a lot of these narratives for me were quite demeaning and quite shaming and quite
Mhm.
difficult. Is that light still mucking it up? It's a bit
Nope,
better now, isn't
we're
it?
good now. Much better, thank you.
Yeah, so I found these narratives to be, or the way that I read them, to be quite subjugating, demeaning, and accusatory, and finger pointing.
Mhm.
Um, and in many ways, they were a little bit like the narratives that brought me into addiction in the first place, that I wasn't good enough, that I needed to change who I was, that I needed to fit in and fit in properly, because, you know, and, it's funny when we talk about young Pueblo, where he talks about this idea of a void in your chest, not feeling good enough. The way that I work is that, you know, if you're a child and you're in a house and you're constantly having to adapt your behavior in order to fit into that environment, what you do is become an actor very, very, very quickly. You've got to redefine your role within that household in order to survive.
Mhm.
And when we do that, we become an actor. And the fearful, frightened little boy that, I don't want to show, I've got to reject. And that is where I feel that when we reject that part of the psyche, we lose a bit of ourselves. And
Mhm.
because we do it unintentionally, because we're so young, it's an adaptive response. We grow up feeling empty, and then of course we constantly look to fill that void. It's a little bit like Gabor Mate talks about feeding the hungry ghosts. These ghosts with huge bellies and scrawny necks, and they can't quite get the nourishment in quickly enough. um so yeah, for me, I think all addiction goes back to this idea that there's a part of us that is crying out for attention, is crying out for love, is crying out to be heard and respected. um, and because we don't have the tools to do that, it looks elsewhere for nourishment. And
Mhm.
that might be in relationships, or driving cars fast, or criminality, or addictions, or you name it.
Mhm.
But you're looking externally to fill the void.
That makes perfect sense to me. Um, no, we like when we talked to Gareth Moxie last week.
Yeah,
And I know you work very closely with him, and we had a brief conversation just before we aired today about the approach um, that he is using compared to, I think, what the traditional approach of flooding was.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how you
Yeah.
guys work together, and like how does that look for someone in therapy with you guys?
Okay, well, first of all, if they're going to Gareth, they're going to go for what he would call a saturation dose, which is not a flood dose, which means that rather than putting 16, 18, 19 milligrams per kilo of Ibogaine into you in one evening for this sort of 18-hour honorific journey, what Gareth will do is maybe put 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 milligrams in you every day for 10 days. Now, this is really, really important. One, it means that you get probably 4 times, maybe 5 times if you're lucky, or certainly 3 times, like definitely 3 times the amount of Ibogaine you'd get in a flood dose. Ibogaine can be cardiotoxic, especially if you've got extended QT intervals or a pre-existing heart condition or something along those lines.
Can I just backpedal just for a second there? Can you explain cardiotoxic? Uh, just
Yeah,
for
well,
clarity for the viewers.
potentially it could kill you.
Right.
Potentially. So if you've got a pre-existing medical condition, or you failed your liver function test, or things like that, Ibogaine is perhaps not the way to do it. Certainly not a flood dose.
Mm-hmm.
It
Sorry, can
can
I
be
just
dangerous.
ask one more quick question before we move
Yeah,
away
sure.
from this particular topic? If you are interested in an Ibogaine ceremony, is it
Hmm.
mandatory, or should it be, if you're looking at the right practitioner, to get a physical done, or what do people need to do to
I
prepare?
wouldn't. I mean, you don't need as much iboga. Let's say if you're going for a psycho-spiritual and you're going to somebody who practices Buddhism and iboga, um, you don't need the amount that you need to get out of addiction, to take you out of withdraw you from addiction essentially in 18 hours. You don't need anything like that. But personally, I wouldn't ever dream of taking Ibogaine or Iboga without a stress EKG, full liver panel test, and full blood tests.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for
Um,
clarifying that.
yeah, why take the risk?
Yeah.
Often what happens is, we've had clients who've done their stress EKG, they failed the EKG. There's been concerns about maybe an extended QT interval of some time, and it's a win-win. One, they haven't gone and done Ibogaine and moved on during the Ibogaine experience, and two, now they're able to deal with their heart defect or their heart problems. Um, you know, let's all be grown up about this. It's about saving lives at the end of the day, and if you are not a viable candidate, you are not a viable candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But the way Gareth works, which is a slow protocol, is so much more safe. It's so less cardiotoxic because you're working with incremental amounts of Ibogaine over an extended period.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the great thing about that is that you end up with 3 to 4 times more noribogaine in your system. And noribogaine is converted by the liver. We believe it's stored in the fat cells of the brain, and it's kind of like a slow release antidepressant, if you want to call it that,
Okay.
which stays in your system for 10 to 12 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And yep, and if you want to change bad habit or bad ritual for good ritual, there's no better time than the 3 months you've got after Ibogaine.
Mm-hmm.
The way I look at Ibogaine is you're a supercomputer. You're an amazing, fantastic supercomputer. And because of a bit of childhood conditioning, childhood trauma, there's a little bit of bad coding. And that little bit of bad coding affects the hard drive, it affects the operating system, it affects the software.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go and do an Ibogaine, essentially what you're doing is going in for a factory reset. You're going in for a defragmentation. And, often the defragmentation will never take the coding away, which
Mm-hmm.
is causing the problem to the computer, but it gives you an opportunity to upload the right software. and the right applications and the antiviral software and things like that. That's how we need to be looking at an Ibogaine treatment.
Mhm.
You know, it's one thing saying, well, let's go and do the world's most powerful entheogen, but let's go back to the environment that I was using in, with the same people that I was using with. Let's go back to the same problems. Let's go back to bailiffs knocking on your door. I'm sorry, but unless you've kind of created a new paradigm, a new environment for yourself, it is very, 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 very difficult to heal in the environment that triggers you.
Mhm.
But you got to remember, but you could be a hardcore heroin user for 30 years, and Ibogaine will take away withdrawal painlessly. Well, when I say painlessly, the journey, the honorific journey itself might be quite difficult to go through.
Mhm.
But people, once they've done Ibogaine, are opiate naive again. They're cocaine naive again. They're one of our biggest problems is perhaps people relapsing post Ibogaine and using the same amount of heroin that they used before they went into treatment. That will kill you because
Mhm.
you're opiate naive again. You've been returned to the state you were before you took heroin.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about, we talked about in our conversation, how in one article I read that it is addictive. Another article I read it was non-addictive. And the interesting thing is these are both reputable sources. So number one, is it addictive? Let's clarify that. And number two,
Right.
where can a person who is interested in learning more about psychedelics and ibogaine, maybe specifically, where can they go to find trustworthy information?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Ibogaine is just simply just such a difficult journey, and it's physically very, 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 very tough.
Mhm.
Emotionally and spiritually, it's very, very honest, and a lot of people, it's not something that you want to go back to. Um, Not in a rush, anyway.
Mhm.
Um, so no, I've never heard of anybody being addicted to Ibogaine. It just seems like such an incredible misnomer for me.
Mhm.
That you could be addicted to it. So no, and I've been working in this game for a long time. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients for thousands and thousands of hours.
Mhm.
I've never come across as anybody who's addicted to Ibogaine. Um, it's funny that you mentioned that because there's so much crap on the internet about Ibogaine.
Yeah.
Um, 98% of what you read and either Reddit or blue light or things like that. Let's look at it this way. If somebody's gone out and done Ibogaine and they're just telling you about the journey and how difficult it was, and they've never mentioned what they've done for pre-treatment, they've never mentioned how they've dealt with integration or long-term integration, why the hell are they writing 500 words? Well,
Mhm.
it's because they're looking for external validation.
Mhm.
They're not the people to be asking about, if they gave a more sort of measured kind of, this is how I got out of addiction. And, it included pre-treatment and included working after. And I went to, connected to nature and connected to play in a major way. And I meditated and, I started changing my life in a big way. Then I think they've got a voice. Then they've got a powerful voice.
Mhm.
But more often than not, all you read about is how gnarly and difficult, and I saw this and I saw that in my Ibogaine journey. Um, so for me, I've got to ask, why are they writing that? For what reason?
Mhm.
You know, that's about ego. That's about telling their story, and it, the way I compare it is, when you've got a soldier doing basic training, it tends to be that soldier has always had the hardest regimental sergeant major, and it's always the hardest assault course, and it's the worst winter when they're doing basic training, because it's all about bigging themselves up. Okay. I think, there's some great resources out there. There's the website from the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, GITA, which is a very, very good sort of resource of information. And I believe that's kind of being redone at the moment. I think maps are very good. The film Dosed is quite informative, maybe kind of quite informative in it worked for the girl who went through there, and she's enjoying long-term recovery now. But as a way of doing Ibogaine, I'm not that impressed by it. Perhaps it's a good record of how Ibogaine shouldn't be done.
Okay.
But these resources are all useful. Dive down there. My website, www.ibogaincounselling.com. People like Juliana Mulligan, Jonathan Dickinson, Claire Wilkins. There are the right resources out there. Look at who's writing the academic papers. Look at who's doing the research. Find the people who are not posting testimonials 3 days after somebody, that's a big one. You see testimonials everywhere. When everybody's in the afterglow of Ibogaine, they're still at the center, and of course they're grateful because they're not clucking anymore. They're not in withdrawal. I don't have time for these type of providers actually at the end of the day, because it's a bit of a misnomer again. Let's talk to the clients 3 to 6 months down the line, and then you have some proof of the efficacy of Ibogaine.
Right. Now, in terms of academics and reliable sources and these sorts of topics, I'd like to talk a little bit about this New Hope Treatment Center that you and Gareth Moxie and another gentleman, I believe it was, are opening in the Bahamas.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's called New Mind, and it's in the Bahamas.
Excuse me, New Mind. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's quite okay. Where it's a 1 month program, and this is very important. Nobody else is doing an extended program. The prevailing way of doing Ibogaine in the world is that you phone an Ibogaine clinic up during the week, and they say to you, come down on Monday. They take the money off you, they flood you on Tuesday, and then they tell you to fuck off on Friday, and that's it. And it's disgusting. It's disgusting towards the person who's in addiction.
Yep.
It's giving them false hope to a certain extent. You're not really looking after the clients. So we've got a 1 month program for opiate addiction, which means that you can come in, you can do pre-treatment. We can start to taper you onto morphine sulfate, especially if you're on cofentanyl or fentanyl or any of these sort of things. Fentanyl, I mean. And then you have your kind of 10-day Ibogaine treatment, let's put it that way, and then we got a week or 2 weeks of integration with you after. And this is about giving you the tools to be able to return to your environment and work proactively, as opposed to just returning to your environment when something comes up and you've got to react in the moment. A lot of these things can be dealt with in the previous. And then, really, I suppose the best recovery is the one who's willing to get out of their environment for 2, 3, 4 months, go out to nature, get fit, start yoga, meditating, buying flowers for their house, remembering to hold their wife's hand, all of these sort of things. That's where the real recovery occurs. So that's what we want to do. We want to provide an end-to-end treatment modality, and that also includes keeping up with the clients for months, if not years after, and allowing them to be part of a community of recovery around Ibogaine. So we're doing that in the Bahamas, and It's licensed and it's legal, which means that we will be the only fully legal licensed Ibogaine treatment center in the world.
Hmm. That sounds amazing. Let me know when you open up.
Yeah,
So
I will
I,
do.
I'm curious, and I'm sure a few other people are. Like I am no longer a person in active addiction,
Mhm.
and but you consistently refer to active addiction, particularly opiates and this sort of a thing. Is ibogaine
Mhm.
something that someone like myself, if I was so inclined, would be a good candidate for, provided I passed the pre medical and all that kind of stuff? Like
Yeah, I mean, it's most people are an excellent candidate. Most people are viable candidates. Most people, if they're willing to do the work and they're willing to look at the reasons why they were in addiction,
Mhm,
that's the big thing.
mhm.
Let's work it out. So I have a very, very sort of specific way of working with that, and I perhaps take this opportunity to explain that.
Please
But
do.
if you could imagine there's a metaphorical cooking pot, an empty pot in front of
Mhm,
you, and you know maybe during kind of the therapy, what I tend to do is send my clients lots of psychoeducation, from Carl Rogers to Eckhart Tolle, to Jung, to Winnicott, to J.K. Rowling. It doesn't really matter. But what I like to do is give them the opportunity to look at different narratives about their life. And we're not just talking about addiction, we're talking about conditioning.
mhm,
We're talking about family relationships. So, if they can start to break those down and start to understand that, that's really important. So every time you send a client something and they have an epiphany and they go, fuck, that's my story. That
mhm,
feels right to me. You know, maybe, for example, picking up drugs age 14,
mhm,
I tell my clients that, it's always a perfectly intelligent and acceptable adaptive response to the pain they were in at that time.
mhm,
It always works out. It opens the door to a better place. It's a place where you feel more comfortable. So why wouldn't you? I mean, I knew the first time I took coke that I was going to have problems with it, but my God, it took me out of suicidal idolization almost immediately.
mhm,
It probably saved my life, actually.
mhm,
Probably stopped myself from killing myself. Um, and so what I kind of rely on is that my clients get these epiphanies and they go, "Oh my God, that's my story. That's really important." Carl Rogers has just said something, or I love the way that Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body, or how you can name your inner child, and it all starts to make. So the clients take these ingredients and they put it in their pot, and very, very, very quickly they start to develop a very rich and nuanced and quite complex recipe of self, a philosophy of self based on what feels right to them.
mhm,
Yep. Um, I mean, essentially, I take my clients shopping. I don't tell them what ingredients to put in, but I tell them where to find these resources. I give them the resources, and if they like a particular ingredient, they can put it into their pot. When clients come to me, I can say 100% of them are coming to me with a great big spoon in their hand, and they're still eating out of daddy's recipe and mummy's recipe and their psychiatrist's recipe and their sponsor's recipe and their girlfriend's recipe. But nowhere along the line have they actually developed and created their own recipe, their own understanding of self, their own understanding of their trauma, their past, the epigenetic history of the family. And, once you start to do that, suddenly your recovery becomes yours. It's something that you own. And that's a very big distinction to make with maybe many of the other modalities of recovery out there. But this is really about a personal journey of discovery about who you are, or how you've been conditioned. And if you can start to break down the prisons of your conditioning, the narratives that have held you into addiction, then you can create a new story for yourself. And that
mhm.
new story can evolve in any way you like. That's what true recovery is. And I don't even like to use the word recovery.
Yeah, I recall you saying
um,
that.
yeah, Just to be radical again. No, I kind of like the, Carl Rogers talks about this idea of the good life.
Right.
Um, and, it is about finding what the good life is for you,
Mm-hmm.
and chasing that, and being committed to it. And, when you do that and you fully sort of jump into that stream, into that flow, life is bloody amazing. It really is. It's not perfect by any means. It's difficult. Um, and that's another thing I want to say, that, there's no such thing as perfect recovery. It just doesn't occur. So, if there is a slip or a relapse along the way, for Christ's sake, be gentle on yourself, be
Mm-hmm.
kind on yourself, see what you can learn from it.
Right.
This is what I hate. I hate the walk of shame.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the white key walk of shame. I lost 2 friends in 10 years to suicide, having relapsed. And both of them killed themselves on the night they connected a white key ring. Now, I know this is a very extreme example, but I just don't like the way that everybody loses their clean time. What is clean time? Why is that a way of judging whether you're in good recovery? People make mistakes along the way. If they can learn to be gentle on themselves and they can learn from those mistakes, then that is true recovery. So for me, and I say this to every client in every session, the perfect human being is imperfect. They're crazy, chaotic, and march to a different beat. And thank God they're like that, because that's what makes us extraordinary. The imperfect human being is the one who chases perfection, because perfection is a cultural, societal, educational, familial, religious narrative of control. It's saying that we need you to be perfect. We need you to be like this so you are acceptable to us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've never met an addict who isn't in addiction because at some level he wasn't acceptable to the people who should have been acceptable to. That's where the pain comes from for most of us. And so, I'm not in. So, this kind of modality where you're working with Ibogaine and you can begin to break down those narratives and really begin to find who you are, it's not about learning anything, it's about unlearning everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the secret to recovery. It's about unlearning.
Mm-hmm.
And coming back to your natural self, where the world is full of possibilities and the sky is blue again and the grass is green again. When we spend the whole time wondering about ourselves, we're not able to connect to the deeper world around us. And when we actually start to connect to the deeper world around us, we stop wondering about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where the real recovery comes, as far as I'm concerned. So it is about, good recovery is about introspection, it's about outrospection, and it's about envirospection. It's about recognizing that actually at the end of the day, we are nature. We're not sovereign of nature. We're not autonomous as nature. We are part of nature. So for me, I tend to find that a bloody good walk in the forest is far, far more useful to me than sitting with my psychotherapist. I'm really being honest here, or going into the rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had very much a similar experience. Yeah, I like to get back to nature when I'm really struggling. So, you mentioned the aftercare and integration. Can you expand just a little bit on that? And
Yeah. I mean, again, I think, you know, one of the most important things is you can't return to an environment that's going to be triggering you. One of the things we do in pre-treatment is that we ask the clients if they're in debt, are the bailiffs going to come round? If they're in treatment, is the electric's going to be turned off and they're going to come back to a unfrozen freezer?
mm-hmm.
And simple things like that. How many dealers are around you? Get rid of their numbers. I do you have a particular place in your house where you use every day? Is that, that little desk in the corner or that little chair?
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of going and doing an Ibogaine treatment and returning to a house where you've got your little rig operation table? Get rid of that table.
Mm-hmm.
Change your flat, change where the seating is, change the area you can live in if you can. Do you like yourself enough to buy flowers for your house twice a week? What time do you get up in the morning? What time do you go to bed? Do you make your bed in the morning? Do you turn your phone on immediately first thing in the morning and put yourself straight into fight or flight syndrome?
Mm-hmm.
Are you giving yourself time to ground and center? So we can do all of this stuff in the pre-treatment to kind of start that process of what you need to connect to in integration. That's why we like to hold on to a client for a week and a half, 2 weeks, because a lot of stuff might start coming up for them, and we want to be the container where that stuff can come up for them safely and they don't get too triggered. But then when they go back, in a lot of cases, maybe going back to the family home is, not a great idea. As somebody said to me, God gives you friends and the devil relatives. Going back to a mother or a sister who was, kind of in many ways, they're quite happy for their black sheep in the family to be the black sheep because it takes the dairy away from them. It takes, many a family will inadvertently or obviously try to bring their black sheep back into addiction in some way, or will hold somebody, or a boyfriend or a girlfriend will hold you hostage. We all know about that in the room. So you've got to be willing to change your environment. Look, let's talk about basic math here. If you've got somebody who's been in addiction for 20 years, yeah, 240 months. 240 months they've invested into their addiction. If we turn around and say to them, can you do aftercare? Can you design something? And no, I don't have the time, blah, blah, blah. Well, actually, let's look at this properly. Invest 1 or 2% of the time that you've invested into your addiction, into your recovery. 2, 3, 4 months. That's all we're asking. 240 months, 1% of that, 2.4. It's not difficult math. Personally, when I went and sat in the forest in Sweden for 3 months after, and I played golf and I went swimming every day and I went cycling and I put on a lot of weight. And thank God I didn't go back to London, where maybe I'd bump into my ex-dealer, maybe I'd bump into somebody I owed money to. All of those fears. I didn't want to return to fear. I didn't want to return to anything that could trigger me. So why don't we do this when people have an Ibogaine thingy, Bob? We've got them out of addiction. We've got them out of addiction relatively painlessly. They've started the process of some depth relational work, inner child trauma work. They're really beginning to move forward. Let's make sure that they do it in the right environment.
So since we're talking numbers, I'm very curious. In terms of, like, if somebody wanted to come visit you for pre-treatment or even come to the new treatment center in the Bahamas, can you give us an idea approximately what a person might be looking at?
Well, I mean, I can't really talk about Bahamas because that to begin with, because we're working for a month, that's a different paradigm to most Ibogaine providers. But you're looking somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 for an Ibogaine treatment. Now, that might sound like a lot of money, but when you've got a full medical team behind you, making sure that everything goes right, maybe it's not. There are some very, very, very good, decent, solid providers out there. There's 5 or 6 in my opinion, but there's 120 providers out there.
Right.
So, you're looking at kind of a $10,000 mark to be flooded out of addiction, if you want to call it that, to be put into your a kind of naive state. Let's put it that way. Myself, I charge around about £500 for 6 sessions. But that's not where the real work is done. It's not done in session. It's done between sessions with the videos I send you and the dialogue and the conversation we have. And then, it's pretty much, we look at normally a minimum of 6 integration sessions after. And then people tend to come back to me ad hoc. But then, people tend to go, they've had their Ibogaine experience and it's done them wonders. And then they, work with maybe some mushrooms or 5-MeO or something along those lines. And so they go into a kind of journey into their soul using these ancient plant medicines. And, for me, if people continue to use these plant medicines with the right intentionality, integrity, respect, and reverence, they can really move forward quickly. I mean, really forward quickly. And then, I'm a great believer. When you get the message, hang up the phone. Don't keep diving down into those psychedelic realms if you're feeling comfortable and you're in a good place. Have a bit of respect for yourself. Have a bit of respect for the medicines. And you'll be amazed at how many people just get their shit together eventually. But certainly, within 2 months of me doing Ibogaine, I'd probably kind of moved myself on 10 or 12 years, I would imagine, in my recovery. It's quite an extraordinary experience for me. I mean, Ibogaine's a master teacher. I was talking before about, when I was using and the ceiling was coming down on me and the walls were coming in on me, and I was utterly and completely disgusted by who I'd become. I didn't recognize myself anymore. And I used to be on the floor, using crack and just crying my eyes out, just in complete and utter despair of who I'd become. And of course, like most addicts, I was isolating. I wasn't showing anybody what was really, really, really going on. But I was always aware of my grandparents looking down from the afterlife on me and kind of going, "Oh my God, what a loser! What's he become? What's happened to our bloodline? This is terrible." And it used to send me into a real sort of kind of utter and complete pit of despair. And when I took up the Ibogaine, the first people I meet in my journey were my grandparents. Now, remember, the Beatty talk about Ibogaine as being a direct portal to talking to your ancestors, to talking to the dead. And I see my grandparents, and they're dressed up in their Sunday best, and my grandfathers are wearing suits and ties and little hats, and my grandmothers have got beautiful handbags and their best jewelry on, and they're looking fantastic. They're looking amazing, just how I remember them as a kid at their very best. And I'm thinking, shit, they must be on their way to a wedding or to meet somebody important. And sure enough, they were there to meet me, which was a bit of a shock. And then when I realized that they were there to meet me, all of that shame and self-pity came cascading down on me, and I felt dreadful, and I felt, oh my God, I have the opportunity to apologize. And I got down on my knee in front of my father's father, and before a word could be uttered from my mouth, his hand came out, ruffled the top of my head, and he went, "Shh, you've done nothing wrong. Thank you for doing the work you're doing, because we weren't able to do it in our lifetime." And in that moment, I was able to put down a rucksack of shame and despair that I had been carrying for years and years and years. Now, had I tried to do that work in regular psychotherapy, it might have taken 10, 12, 15 years if I was lucky,
Right. Yep.
if it would have ever happened. And it happened during my Ibogaine treatment. And you know, this, to be flooded with such peace and such acceptance, and to recognize that I wasn't the fuck up I thought I was, that I was also on my own journey, and that, you know, maybe in some funny sort of way, I was maybe the person within many, many, many lines and many, many generations of my family who actually did some work about dealing with the traumas and dealing with the narratives that families hold about themselves and carry about themselves. And it was truly, truly extraordinary. And then another time, and I think a lot of my clients, or a lot of our clients here, or a lot of people listening to this, will really relate to this particular story, that I took Ibogaine, and Ibogaine is very direct. It's paternal, but it's direct. It's quite brutal in how it tells you what life is about, how you're screwing up, or what's going wrong. And I took the Ibogaine, and it instantly started abusing me, and it was telling me that I was cheap and I was nasty and that I shouldn't be doing therapy, and I was 3 seconds away from relapsing. Therefore, I was a fraud. I was a horrible person. And it was getting more and more abusive and aggressive with me. And I'm there thinking, well, hang on, you know, Ibogaine shouldn't be doing this. It is direct, but it shouldn't be abusing me. Oh, well, I'm so awful. I'm so terrible that Ibogaine's made an exception for me. And as this journey went on, it became increasingly more and more and more difficult for me, until I had the epiphany that it wasn't the Ibogaine talking to me. It's how I treat myself. It's how I talk to myself. And it's so deeply inured into my thinking and my fabric that often I don't even recognize how brutal I am to myself. And on the second I made that epiphany, the Ibogaine took me on a magical mystery tour of the universe. And I went down wormholes, and I went to all sorts of places. And it afforded me the opportunity to go down a particular wormhole where I was going to go to creation. I was going to go to where stars were born. I was going to go to God. And as I'm going down this hole, and I'm getting closer and closer to the veil, and I'm just about to get all of this amazing knowledge, this scene, kind of like in the A-Team, which used to come across your screen like that when they changed screens, of a field in Hertfordshire where I live. And every time, and it allowed me to kind of nearly meet God about 6 times. And then this field would come in, and I would feel a palpable sense of disappointment, but also, you know, very, very grateful that I'd had such a sort of spiritual experience. About 3 years later, I'm driving along the road about 5 o'clock in the morning on a July morning, and the sun's beginning to come up, and the mist is coming up from the fields, and I took to my left, and there was the scene from my Ibogaine journey. And I got out of the car, and I felt the pure, raw energy of life, of love, of God, of the universe in that field.
Wow.
And the Ibogaine had essentially said to me, open your eyes, it's all around you. A truly transpersonal experience. You know, you can't get these gifts from anywhere else. These are extraordinary gifts. And so now I walk around the world with a very, very different view to nature. And it's funny, you're talking about the Lakota tribes and the First Nations and how they look at the world. Actually, this ancient entheogen gave me the opportunity to perhaps look at the universe in this way again, which most of us find incredibly difficult, because we are so kind of conditioned to be part of culture, part of society.
Mm-hmm.
We're so conditioned to move away from nature. We're
That's
so
so
conditioned to think
incredibly
ourselves,
distracted.
yeah,
Deliberately.
so distractive. Yeah, the whole time. And, so for me, you know, if you've been gifted an 80 years down on this earth, you're essentially going to earth school. Yep. You're here to be in awe and wonder and to appreciate all the amazing things that are going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe at some level, we do have a choice when we come down here. And, maybe 54 years ago, a voice came out of the ether and said, Anders, it's your chance to go to Earth School. What curriculum do you think you're going to learn from this time?
Mm-hmm.
A bit of childhood trauma and addiction will get me there. But that's the amazing thing, because once you've moved through that pain, once you come to terms with it, the world becomes something entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to achieve that in the rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that it's my story. It doesn't belong to anybody else. But the beautiful thing about working with these ancient medicines is that everybody starts to create their own story, their own understanding, their own recipe. And when you own your own recipe, you want to hold on to it. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want to give it away. If you hand over your will and your power to a third party, it's going to be difficult. You're going to struggle. And I think this is where the beauty of Ibogaine and ayahuasca and magic mushrooms all come into their own. Mm-hmm. I'm a complete convert. 10 years ago, I would have thought it was mumbo jumbo bullshit. Now, I see something entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's for everybody. I think if you have a calling to do it, great. But if you don't have a calling to do it, don't do it. I would never force anybody down that route. Mm-hmm. And we never should do.
Right.
But yeah, and since I've got out of the clutches of addiction, my life, as they say, is in the rooms, it is beyond my wildest dreams. It really is. I have 2 beautiful children. I have a fantastic job. I really enjoy what I'm doing. I'm helping people. I'm working with the oldest, most ancient medicines out there. Mm-hmm. You got to remember, these medicines were around 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years before modern medicine.
Yeah.
I kind of get a bit pissed off when people talk about them being alternative medicines. It's like, hang on, which ones have been around 6,000 years and which ones have been around 120 years? You want to talk about alternative?
Well, and a lot of them are synthesized from those older medicines.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think, the beautiful thing about working with entheogens and psychedelics is that they give you sovereignty and ownership of your journey. And they allow you to create the story that you feel comfortable with. And they allow you to break down the conditioned narratives that have been holding you in a place of pain. And so for me, I feel so incredibly grateful to have done Ibogaine. We've known about their addiction interrupting qualities for 50, 60 years, since 1962. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, it's probably only about 75,000 people in those 62 years have taken Ibogaine for addiction. And if we think about the billions and billions and billions and billions of people who've been struggling with alcoholism or gambling or drug addiction or big pharma addiction, the people who have taken Ibogaine or had the opportunity to take Ibogaine, they've been in a percentile which is a 1,000th of a percent. Mm-hmm. So anybody who has the opportunity to take Ibogaine better remember what a privileged chance they have. Mm-hmm. And to not look at it like that conditioner that you just buy from the shelf.
Yeah.
but to put intentionality, to put integrity, to put respect and reverence into the process of taking the Ibogaine or the ayahuasca or the mushrooms. Because if you do that by dint, you're putting respect, reverence, intentionality, and integrity into yourself. And that is a sign of self-love. So yeah, it might be the portal towards self-love.
Fascinating stuff. We have a few questions and comments coming in here.
Yeah,
First
sure.
one that we have, I believe, is from. I
I'm
can't
doing
remember.
Ibogaine next for this, by the way.
What's that?
I'm doing Ibogaine next for my tobacco.
Right, you
I'll
mentioned
be
that.
I'll be microdosing Iboga to help me get off that. It really
Well,
does make a profound difference. It makes it a hell of a lot easier.
I might have to explore that.
No.
It's what I still smoke, but a lot less than I once did. So Corinne
Mm.
Marie would like to know: is there
Mhm.
anywhere in the U.S. I can get this treatment? I'm so tired of methadone, and I know you also have some interesting opinions on
Okay,
the
so
methadone.
methadone is a long acting.
Mm-hmm.
So Ibogaine does not work with long acting opiates. It works with short acting. So the secret is to get you onto morphine sulfate. I would say heroin, but we can't find pure heroin anywhere in North America, not unless it's absolutely shoved full of cofentanyl and fentanyl. So the trick is to taper from the methadone onto morphine sulfate, and then then take the Ibogaine. And what happens is that the way that Gareth works is that you then taper off the morphine sulfate with the Ibogaine. It's a slightly protracted affair, but what I would ask you to do is perhaps give this lady my email address, and I'll be very, very, very happy to put her in contact with people who can help her. I'm afraid to say that in North America, in the United States, there's nobody who can really help you. You're going to have to go over the border to either Canada or Mexico or Costa Rica. But that's the reality. It's just too dangerous to be providing. It's a long prison sentence in America
Mm-hmm.
for providing the game, which is tragic.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. Uh,
but
I
that's
noticed
the
in
case.
your response there that you specified the difference between like heroin, the purity of the heroin, and the fact that most supply nowadays, if not all supply, is laced with fentanyl and carfentanil.
Mm.
So if somebody is currently using fentanyl,
Mm-hmm.
do they need to look at what morphine sulfates? Like, is there a particular problem with ibogaine and carfentanil?
No, not particularly. I mean, you can have an Ibogaine treatment for fentanyl and cofentanyl, but
Mm-hmm.
the problem is that what I'm alluding to is that if you're taking heroin or street heroin in America, actually what you're doing is playing Russian roulette,
Mm-hmm.
because you just don't know what the hell's inside it, and
Yeah.
it does make the treatments more difficult,
Mm-hmm.
certainly. But Subutex and morphine are really the enemy of anybody in addiction,
Mm-hmm.
because
Subutex and methadone.
actually, yeah,
Yeah.
what they're doing is putting you onto a long acting, which is actually harder to get off than the heroin itself in the first place. It's
Mm-hmm.
just government approved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. There are people who can help you out there, and there is a process to getting to Ibogaine, and it's not about getting you into withdrawal. It's not about hurting you. It's not about we're not about that. We don't, you know. It's helping people with as much compassion and kindness and fullness of heart as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, please feel free. Anybody who's got questions about how they can go about getting ibogaine treatment, or where to go, I can certainly help them with. I mean, New Mind hasn't started in the Bahamas yet, so I could put people on to some of the better providers out there.
Mhm.
I'd be very, very willing and happy to do that because that's my job.
And next up, Ronnie Martis would like to know, is he talking HCl or TA with these doses? Now, I hope you understand what those abbreviations mean.
Yeah,
And could you
hydrochloride and
please?
total
Okay.
hydrochloride and total alkalides. You know what? I'm going to defer this kind of, and I did say to you beforehand that when it comes down to Ibogaine provision, I am not a provider.
Right.
I do the psychological stuff beforehand and after.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I would defer you to somebody like Gareth Moxie. What we do find is that most providers use a little bit of both. They can use TA for a slightly more honoric treatment, HCL, PTA, depending on who the provider is, they might be using them in tandem,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an art form, and that also a science and an art form.
Okay.
So I am not the person to talk to about that. I'm really, really sorry. I wish I could be, but do you know what? I've kind of consciously made a decision not to learn too much about that because I want to concentrate on staying in my lane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. More
So sorry
people
about that, Ronnie.
should do that, but
Yeah.
but thank you for the question, Ronnie. And as Andrew suggested, maybe you can contact our friend Gareth, who might be able to expand on that a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
further,
and
or at least direct you to somebody who might
yeah,
be able
and
to talk
the other
others.
thing the other thing I want to say is, please, 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 people, do not do Ibogaine on your sofa at home. Okay, it's
Mm-hmm.
too dangerous, and we have too many people kind of mucking it up and then denigrating the Ibogaine industry.
Mm-hmm.
And Big Pharma doesn't want Ibogaine to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't. It doesn't want a one-hit wonder. They want to keep you in addiction. They want to keep you on the methadone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I could be wrong. I mean, if somebody could look it up, but let's say if it's $24 a day per person on average, and how many addicts do you have in North America on methadone or and the like? Probably 500,000.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of revenue for stockholders. They don't give a shit about the addict. They give a shit about how much money they're making.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in their best interest to denigrate and to stop Ibogaine getting any traction.
Mm-hmm.
It's changed a little bit in the last 2 to 3 years with the psychedelic revolution going on, but you know,
On that note, I had come across an article that claimed that there are various derivatives of ibogaine designed to lack the psychedelic properties, such as 18-MC. Do you know
yeah,
anything about that? Like, there are clinical
not
trials.
really. Not really. I believe there are clinical trial going on under maybe Dr. Deborah Mash.
Okay.
Um, not
So
really sure. I mean,
my
at,
question would
at
be, if
some
it's
level,
lacking the psychedelic properties, what it seems like it's the psychedelic properties that people are, that, like, people who have experience in
I
ibogaine.
think the psychedelic, yeah, but maybe at some level, you know, I suppose the way they're looking at it, look, one of the things about psychedelics and theogens is that it gives you sovereignty of your own mind. It gives you an emotional and spiritual life of your own, and that's bloody dangerous to governments and to institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And the church, the last thing it wants is you to have your own relationship with God.
Right.
You know, um, so I can see that if you're very traditional and you're towing the line and Ibogaine can just literally work as a fantastic addiction interrupter, well, great. That might be something worthwhile for some people. The 18MC. For me personally, um, it was the psychedelic. It was the honoraic journey that I took, which really allowed me to find myself. Really allowed me to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I get what they're trying at.
Mm-hmm.
It's horses for courses. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe a lot of people really just don't want to look at their core pain. They're not brave enough to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they just want everything done for them. And so maybe if they can just get out of addiction at one level, that's enough for them. I mean, I find that rather sad, but, you know, that's better than dying on the streets of Vancouver, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, we have one more question from Ronnie, or excuse me, a comment. Ronnie says San Pedro is great medicine to throw in there too, with things from the earth to help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of these plant medicines. I mean, often what we do with Ibogaine, a lot of Ibogaine providers are beginning to find this is not from the earth, but it is from the toad, bufo, or the synthetic version of 5-MeO, which many people call the God molecule. Um, there seems to be this fantastically strange symbiosis between them, where you take 5-MeO and you melt into the universe, and um, non-duality becomes the norm.
Wow.
It's you know
Sounds intense.
it's absolutely amazing. And then you've got Ibogaine, which is just such an earthy, ancient, Tolkien-esque type of medicine, real Old Testament, really earthy.
Mm-hmm.
But there is this incredible symbiosis between the two of them. I know for a fact Gareth often likes to give people a parting gift of 5-MeO after they've done the Ibogaine, because the Ibogaine can be emotionally and spiritually very taxing. And then when you
Mm-hmm.
get kind of returned, uh, or you become part of the universe again, and you kind of lose all sense of ego,
Yeah.
and it's the most extraordinarily beautiful experience any person could ever go to.
Bet.
Those in combination work really well. San Pedro is a really, really, really beautiful psychedelic for reconnecting to earth and nature, and for seeing the cosmos and the universe. As our mushrooms,
I used to love
these
mushrooms for
are
that
these
reason.
are extraordinary ancient medicines, extraordinary plant teachers. I really do hope that we start to return to our symbiotic relationship with
Mm-hmm.
them, which we had for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And then, suddenly they're dirty drugs all of a
Right.
sudden. No, they're
Mm-hmm.
not. They're not drugs. They're plant medicines. They're entirely different creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Entirely different creatures.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, San Pedro, I would like some myself.
Well, Anders, I'm afraid I can't help you with that one. But
No.
we have come to the end of the questions and comments today. So I'm wondering, is there anything that you would like to leave us with?
Um, yeah, I mean, look, if anybody's interested, just pop me an email. Look for my website, or find a way of getting hold of me. I'll be very, very, very happy to help in any way I can, and to move people in the right direction. Um, I've seen countless people who shouldn't have survived addiction not only survive but thrive because of what they've done with Ibogaine, and how they've completely reevaluated their life and their connection to life and their emotions and their spirit as a result of it. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to take all your problems away, but it might give you the opportunity to look at your problems in a slightly different way. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the beautiful thing about it. Life is difficult and it is hard. But certainly Ibogaine and other plant medicines have given me the opportunity to reevaluate how I perceive my life. I was conditioned very much to think in a very, very, very specific way through my childhood and through my education.
Mm-hmm.
And by finding a way to think that I felt I had ownership and sovereignty of is the biggest gift any person can get into their lifetime, is to know themselves, warts and all. That's the biggest gift.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very, very passionate for it. Gareth, there's a lot of us out there
Mm-hmm.
who are real torchbearers for this, because we live in wonder every day at seeing people who shouldn't be getting out of the problems they're in, getting out of them. It's a privilege to work. So feel free to get hold of me. I'd be more than happy to make suggestions or push in the right place or whatever.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Anders, for your time today. It's been incredibly enlightening and most enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you. It went very, very quickly. I realized that you didn't talk too much. I might have to do Ibogaine for verbal diarrhea.
I might need to do Ibogaine for this problem with being like a church mouse, as Dan calls me, because I tend to be more of a listener than a talker, and it's certainly in a forum like this where you have much more important things to say than I ever could.
So, I thought you were a fantastic host. So thank you very
you.
much. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're a fabulous guest.
Daniel in the background beavering away in front of his computer. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Anders. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
There is power in numbers. If you'd like to contribute to ending the stigma around emotional pain, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Like and comment your thoughts on our posts. Let us come together with our lived and living experience as a resource that has the power to engage new thought processes, to promote new ideas, to broaden the spectrum of care, and to show the world that we can recover. There is a safer way, and we're here to show you that it is possible. Take care of yourselves and others, everyone.